comment on this?
No, I looked up only the, the history of the term, so which is used in racing, as a way to start a race. Yeah. Yeah, no, I realized that it, and it has, one of the main uses originally, which it wasn't one that probably either of us are familiar with, was to start a race. You see, that was at least that's what I found in the OED and so on.
But you said, did you say that Lawrence
Stern?
wrote about this several books past?
Yeah, in other words, the initial scene of Trim reading the Sermon of Yorick was composed by him initially. But he wrote it in such a way that he was already alluding to Hogarth through the line of that phrase, the line of beauty. And then he sent a letter, or he actually didn't do it directly. He did it through intermediaries to Hogarth, asking him if he might look at the two books, and if he felt inspired, that it would be wonderful if he could, illustrate this scene. And Hogarth read it and was very, interested in it, and he did several different drawings of it.
Right about that time.
Yeah, that was after the book was published in serial. So first two books at a time, at 2 years apart each. So in the interval of the publication of the first two books, Hogarth read it and did provide an illustration that then served as a frontispiece for the second and following editions. The only problem is, I'm not quite sure about this. If you go on the internet, a lot of this stuff is available actually on the internet, you'll find another drawing of this in which the shadow is gone. And I haven't been able to figure out whether this is an original Hogarth, variation, whether he did, there it is, yeah. Another, one, or whether it was modified by others, and so and so on. So there are different ones. And for me, the shadow is very important. That the hat falls, and so my idea is that Stern then, that Hogarth introduces this from where we don't know, from what inspiration, but that's something. That's sort of where he puts his mark on it. It's not at all in the book. And then Stern, seeing that, perhaps it's all speculation, but then brings it back in a couple of episodes later in that second scene where Trim responds to the death of. See, here this is the scene at Tristram's birth, and the second scene is at the strange death of this figure Bobby, whom we never see at all. So it's very strange when you read the novel, because you have no sense of who Bobby was or something. There's just this abstract news that suddenly Master Bobby is dead. There's no explanation why, and so on. And then there are the various reactions of people. It's almost like you isolate it. It's almost like you're isolating it from every possible pathos in order to do an experiment of how people react to the news of sudden, unexpected death. And you get Walter, using his erudition, Tristram's father, in order to avoid essentially mourning, to avoid grieving. And then you have the scene in it's a little like Shakespeare. You have the masters in one part of the house and the servants in another part. And so you have the coachman saying it was at Whitsuntide. And then you have this brilliant thing where Trim says, Whitsuntide, Shrovetide. You can't dating it. Dating means nothing here, because this is what gives us a sense of the absolute discontinuity of time. Just at the drop of a hat. Okay. Uh-huh.
That to me is a little bit like an icon of grief, almost like a star. I see it. I almost see like a mouth there or something.
Absolutely. No, I think it's very, because you see through the dark, you see the hollow in the hat. That's why it does remind me something of this, of this, the ambassadors a little bit there, this strange, anamorphized skull there, although, it's not, so on. And
interesting thing about this is the way you set up the exchange between the two of them.
yeah.
So Bogart draws, but adds something, wasn't there.
Absolutely.
Stern responds by writing the scene. By rewriting the scene with all the same positions and adding a hat. It's kind of, and it's just a nice back and forth between a writer and an artist.
Yeah.
For them to it's a conversation in a way.
Absolutely, that's what I said. But it's interesting in the context that you have birth and death. See, that I think is what really, and Tristram Shandy is a strange, very comical novel, but it's very melancholy at the same time. It's he's thinking, because all the main figures in it have long since perished. This is a man, it's written by Stern, who's old and who's ill, and Tristram is more or less identified with that figure, thinking back on his life and this very odd situation where Shandy Hall, that's why I mentioned enclosures, it's totally sealed off from the outside world. And the people who are there are also, that's why fortifications and wounds are so interesting, are in a way have retreated from active life into this sort of manner. Toby forced to retreat from active life because of the wound he incurred at Namur, and which is always under the suspicion of having possibly rendered him impotent. It's in his groin, and then you have a play on where did Uncle Toby get his wound. And he got it in Namur. No, where did Uncle Toby? Yeah, and the final two books are with Widow Wadman, who courts Toby until she is too worried about where he might have gotten his wound, and Uncle Toby then just is replaying the actions of the war in the garden with his servant Trim, as a way of trying to, exorcise this demon. And then there are these sort of very fascinating, amusing, interlocking connections in order to set up one of his toy cannons in the garden. Trim takes out a part of the curtain rod, which then falls and almost castrates Tristram. You see, and so there's this incredible sort of interlocking sort of activity of people defending and obsessionally acting out, and then and then wounding or causing others to be wounded, but the wound is almost catastrophic, but not quite, and so on. So so you get this. It's a very sort of parodic and at the same time very serious game that's going on there, and this fits in well. When you see it out of context, it might seem a little bit more harmless than it is when you read it. Although it's a kind of black humor. It's sort of laughing at something that is not easy to laugh at in some sense. And also, there's a kind of wistfulness, and I sort of meant a contrast with Poe. You see, where you have that, really gloomy and melancholy and relatively one-sided. This is a very different way of dealing with, problem of mortality, problem of threat, of danger, and so on and so forth. So it's sort of interesting to see those two, to juxtapose the two of them, at least for me in that respect.
I want to go back to your discussion of your radio plays that you love so much. I'm wondering if you wouldn't have had the same disillusionment if you read the stories in print with illustrations.
Probably. I wonder about that.
Because there's
Yeah.
something about the drawing
Yeah.
that could enhance the
Yeah.
text versus television.
Yeah.
As a kind of a flattening or
Yeah.
lead weight
Yeah.
to it, like you described.
First of all, it's almost all of these radio plays very often were based on illustrated novel before that were done in the 30s and so on. So they were initially illustrated in some sense. Then they were taken and made the basis of radio plays, and then they were taken, some of them, and put on television and so